Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Opening scene. Visuals. Soldiers advancing through no man's land in World War I trenches. Breadlines in the Great Depression with somber expressions on people's faces. Martin Luther King Jr. delivering the "I Have a Dream" speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. A split-second sequence of a nuclear missile launch followed by mushroom clouds during the Cold War. Voiceover. The 20th century transformed America into a global superpower and a beacon of progress, but it was a century marked by conflict, hardship, and the unyielding fight for justice. From the devastation of world wars to the triumphs of the civil rights movement, this is the story of 20th century America. Segment 1. World War I and its aftermath, 1914-1919. Visuals. Soldiers marching with gas masks, the muddy trenches, and the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. Narration. America entered World War I in 1917, ending its long-standing policy of isolationism. The war reshaped the global balance of power, and the United States emerged as a dominant economic and military force. At home, however, the 1920s saw the rise of prosperity and a cultural boom, but also tensions over race and immigration. Segment 2. The Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression, 1920-1939. Visuals. Jazz musicians, flapper girls dancing, and Wall Street stock tickers in the 1920s. Transition to breadlines, Dust Bowl scenes, and Franklin D. Roosevelt delivering a fireside chat. Narration. The 1920s brought economic prosperity and cultural dynamism, but it all came crashing down with the Great Depression in 1929. Over a quarter of the workforce was unemployed and millions of families were plunged into poverty. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal programs aimed to provide relief, recovery, and reform, fundamentally reshaping the role of government in American life. Segment 3. World War II and the post-war boom, 1939-1950s. Visuals. Pearl Harbor bombing, D-Day landings, and soldiers celebrating VE Day. Post-war suburban homes, cars, and televisions in 1950s America. Narration. World War II was a defining moment for the United States, uniting the nation and cementing its position as a global superpower. The post-war period saw an unprecedented economic boom, the rise of suburbia, and the start of the baby boom. However, the Cold War with the Soviet Union loomed large, shaping both foreign and domestic policies. Segment 4. The Civil Rights Movement and Social Change, 1950s-1970s. Visuals. Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat, Martin Luther King Jr. leading marches, and the Civil Rights Act being signed. Scenes of protests against the Vietnam War, the feminist movement, and the Stonewall riots. Narration. The struggle for equality defined the mid-20th century. The civil rights movement dismantled segregation and paved the way for social change, while other movements, feminism, LGBTQ+ rights, and anti-war protests, pushed for broader societal reforms, often clashing with entrenched systems of power. Segment 5. The Cold War and Technological Advancements, 1947-1991. Visuals. Nuclear missile tests, John F. Kennedy delivering his Ask Not speech, and the moon landing. The fall of the Berlin Wall, and scenes of Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. Narration. The Cold War shaped global geopolitics for nearly 5 decades. America and the Soviet Union vied for dominance, but the space race showcased human ingenuity, culminating in the Apollo moon landing in 1969. The eventual collapse of the Soviet Union marked the end of an era and the triumph of democracy over communism. Segment 6. The Late 20th Century. Challenges and Triumphs, 1970s-1999. Visuals. Watergate hearings, the Iran hostage crisis, and images from the Reagan era. Fall of the Berlin Wall, dot-com boom, and celebrations of the new millennium. Narration. The late 20th century was a period of contradictions. Scandals like Watergate and crises like the Vietnam War tested American resilience, but the nation emerged stronger. Economic growth in the 1980s and the tech revolution of the 1990s propelled America into a new age of innovation and global leadership. Closing scene. Visuals. A montage of historical progress, the Statue of Liberty at sunrise, diverse groups of people celebrating, and a waving American flag. Voiceover. The 20th century was a story of struggle, resilience, and progress. From war to peace, despair to hope, and division to unity, the journey of America in this transformative era laid the foundation for the world we live in today. This is the legacy of 20th century America. Additional notes for video production: soundtrack, use orchestral music for dramatic moments, jazz for the 1920s, and stirring patriotic tunes for closing scenes. On-screen text and maps include key dates, maps showing territorial changes, and headlines from historical newspapers. Narration style: a clear, engaging, and authoritative voice to maintain viewer. Opening scene: visuals, a montage of iconic moments from the 20th century. Soldiers in WWI trenches, the attack on Pearl Harbor, MLK at the Lincoln Memorial, the Apollo 11 moon landing, and a suburban family in front of their 1950s home. Voiceover. The 20th century was an era of extraordinary change. It shaped the modern United States through war, economic turmoil, social revolutions, and technological breakthroughs. In this video, we explore the key moments that defined a century of transformation. 1. World wars and global conflict visuals. Soldiers in trenches with barbed wire and gas masks, World War I. Propaganda posters like Uncle Sam Wants You, the attack on Pearl Harbor, women working in factories, Rosie the Riveter, D-Day landings, and the iconic flag raising at Iwo Jima. Voiceover. The 20th century began with global conflict. World War I, also known as the Great War, saw the United States enter the fray in 1917, tipping the scales in favor of the Allies. Over 4 million American men were mobilized, and the war claimed 116,000 American lives. The war ended in 1918 with the Treaty of Versailles, but it left a world grappling with political upheaval and economic instability. Only 2 decades later, the world was plunged into an even greater conflict. World War II began in 1939, but it wasn't until the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 that the United States joined the fight. The nation mobilized its industry and workforce, with women stepping into roles traditionally held by men. The war ended in 1945 with the Allied victory, but it also introduced the atomic age with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forever altering the nature of warfare. 2. The Great Depression, 1929 to 1939. Visuals: breadlines, soup kitchens, and families standing outside their makeshift homes. Farmers on the road during the Dust Bowl. Franklin D. Roosevelt speaking into a microphone during a fireside chat. Voiceover. The roaring prosperity of the 1920s came to an abrupt end with the stock market crash of 1929. The Great Depression was the most severe economic downturn in U.S. history, leaving 1 in 4 Americans unemployed. Millions lost their homes, and the Dust Bowl, a series of severe dust storms caused by overfarming and drought, forced thousands of farmers to migrate west in search of work. President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, a series of programs designed to combat the crisis. Landmark initiatives like Social Security, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the Works Progress Administration provided jobs and support, redefining the government's role in the economy. 3. The Civil Rights Movement, 1950s-1960s. Visuals: Rosa Parks sitting on a bus. Martin Luther King Jr. delivering his "I Have a Dream" speech during the March on Washington. Protesters being hosed down by police during peaceful demonstrations. Voiceover. The fight for racial equality took center stage in the 1950s and 1960s. The civil rights movement sought to dismantle segregation and combat systemic racism. Rosa Parks' courageous refusal to give up her bus seat in Montgomery sparked the year-long bus boycott, while Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as a leader advocating for nonviolent resistance. The movement achieved significant milestones, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed segregation, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which removed barriers to African American suffrage. However, the struggle for equality and justice remains ongoing. 4. The Cold War and the Space Race, 1947-1991. Visuals: images of U.S. and Soviet leaders during negotiations. The Cuban Missile Crisis map with highlighted nuclear sites. Apollo 11 launch and Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon. Voiceover. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as global superpowers, locked in an ideological battle known as the Cold War. This era saw proxy wars, an arms race, and moments of high tension, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which brought the world perilously close to nuclear war. The Cold War also spurred the space race, a competition for technological supremacy. In 1969, the United States achieved a historic victory when Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon, a moment that symbolized American innovation and determination. Social and cultural changes, post-Weiss 1990s, visuals, soldiers. Returning home and families moving into suburban homes in the 1950s. Footage of Woodstock, anti-war protests, and feminist marches in the 1960s. Early computers like the IBM 5150 and the first cell phones in the 1980s. Voiceover. The post-war period brought prosperity and rapid social change. The 1950s saw the rise of suburbia, consumer culture, and a baby boom. But beneath this prosperity lay a growing counterculture. In the 1960s, young Americans challenged traditional values through movements advocating for civil rights, peace, women's liberation. Thank you for watching this video.